Incidentally, the Bible strongly supports this attitude. God himself worked 6 days and rested on the seventh, and he instructs us to do the same. Point 3 Scripture also says that life involves a balance between numerous activities. God has made everything beautiful in its time. On the other hand, what asset does Millie bring to the equation? Her approach to life reminds us that we each have a solemn responsibility to work. Life is not a bowl of cherries, it requires discipline and determination. The Bible supports this idea. The Apostle Paul said, "If a man will not work, he shall not eat." 5 Scripture also warns against the dangers of idleness. When we look for the positive side of our differences, we have taken a step in the direction of maximizing our differences. What about differences that involve immoral behavior? For example, he lies, she doesn't. She finds his lies extremely irritating, and he finds her commitment to truth equally irritating. It is my conviction that there is no asset in immoral behavior. Such behavior calls for repentance and forgiveness, which in turn and in time lead to reconciliation. We discussed this process as part of Strategy 1, when we talked about dealing with past failures. Most of the differences that irritate us in the normal flow of life do not involve immorality. They are simply expressions of our unique design, and there is always a positive side to our uniqueness. If we are to maximize our differences in marriage, we must look for the assets. Learn from your differences. Remember, God's design for our differences is that they be complementary. They are not intended to divide us but to unite us. Ask God to show you what you need to learn from your differences. Millie needs to learn that life is more than work. For the benefit of her mental and marital health, she may need to take time to sit with Joe and relax while watching a movie. Perhaps she can learn more about the rhythm of work and relaxation. To do so will enrich her life and her marriage. On the other hand, perhaps Joe can learn that as a husband who cares for his wife as Christ cares for the church, he needs to take more initiative to help her do things around the house. If he takes the servant attitude of Christ, he may well ask her, "What could I do to help you this evening?" Doing those things before he sits down to relax may make it easier for her to sit down with him. There are always lessons to be learned from our differences. None of us has reached the apex of Christian maturity. God's intention is that marriage will stimulate our spiritual, intellectual, and emotional growth. When we look for the lessons in our differences, we will find them and benefit from them. Replace condemnation with affirmation. A key aspect of learning from our differences is replacing condemnation with affirmation. When we view our differences as irritations, we typically deliver sermons of condemnation to our spouse. "I can't believe you are so lazy," or, "Why can't you sit down and relax with me? Why do you always have to be doing something?" Such criticisms perpetuate the winter season of marriage and build icy blocks of resentment. However, once we understand that our differences are designed to be positive, not negative, we can replace condemnation with words of affirmation. Millie might begin by saying, "I know that I have gotten upset with you in the past about how much time you spend in front of the television and how you don't help me with things around the house. But I am beginning to realize that God made us different for a purpose, and I need to learn from you how to relax and enjoy life more and not be so obsessed with getting everything done. So I want to thank you for being the person you are." Such an affirming statement may even solicit a hug from Joe. Whatever his response, he now feels more accepted by her. Joe might begin by saying, "I know that in the past I've been critical of you for how you're always on the move, never stopping to smell the roses. But I'm beginning to realize that God made us different for a purpose, and I want you to know that I appreciate all your hard work and how you keep things flowing smoothly around here. I know you would like me to help from time to time, and I want to do that more often." Both partners in a marriage need to feel appreciation rather than condemnation. Mutual affirmation creates an atmosphere for positive change. By now you have no doubt begun to see how the various strategies can work together to move a marriage out of a fall or winter season and into spring or summer. Regardless of where you're starting, there is always a positive first step you can take to begin changing the season of your marriage. Discover a plan for maximizing your differences. Now that you have established a pattern of affirmation and cooperation, you can begin to explore a plan for maximizing your differences. Millie, realizing that she needs to have a more balanced lifestyle, may offer to spend 30 minutes each evening on the couch with Joe, talking or watching TV with him, simply seeking to relax and unwind from the cares of the day. Joe may say to Millie, "I know that I need to help you more around the house. In the past, I have resented the fact that you were always doing something and never had time for me. I really wanted to help you, I just didn't want to spend the whole evening working. But because I do want to have the attitude of Christ, why don't we identify some things I could do that would help you the most, so we can both have time to relax together?" With this attitude, Joe and Millie will learn how to maximize their differences. When they do, not only will they be a compatible team, but they will more effectively accomplish the purposes that God has for each of their lives. Now let's go back to Gerald, who loaded the dishwasher like an engineer, and Marcy, who loaded it as if she were playing frisbee. His personality is strong on organization, whereas hers is strong on spontaneity. How might they maximize their differences? Perhaps they could agree that Gerald would be the team member who would load the dishwasher, because his method tends to produce cleaner dishes and fewer broken glasses. On those evenings when he has a meeting and Marcy loads the dishwasher, he would allow her the freedom to do it her way. He knows that when he unloads the dishwasher the next morning, he might find spoons still covered with peanut butter and maybe a chipped glass or two, but he realizes that these issues aren't the end of the world. The dirty spoons can soak in the measuring cup that she forgot to put in the dishwasher, and the glasses can be replaced. After all, he's married to a spontaneous woman who keeps his life exciting. It's a small price to pay for such a treasure. Maximizing our skills and minimizing our weaknesses are part of moving us back to the springtime of marriage. 5 steps to maximize your differences. 1. Identify your differences. 2. Rule less than for assets in your differences. 3. Learn from your differences. 4. Replace condemnation with affirmation. 5. Discover a plan for maximizing your differences. What if your spouse is not willing to work with you on maximizing your differences? What if he or she is locked into one way of doing things and is not even willing to discuss your differences? All is not lost. You still have the power of influence. In the next chapter, I want to help you learn how to use your influence in a positive way. Even if your spouse initially won't participate or cooperate, you can still create positive changes in your marriage. If your marriage is in the season of winter or fall, you are probably reading this book alone. You wish that your spouse would read it. You wish he or she would be willing to implement the strategies that would move your marriage forward to the spring and summer seasons. But based on past experience and your current circumstances, you have little hope that he or she will do so. Todd, who has been married for 14 years, expressed his frustration. "I feel trapped in so many instances. It doesn't matter what I say, it always leads to issues. I am very concerned about giving up on my marriage, because I have so much invested. My wife has gone to work in the last year, which helps, but she brings her work home, and I feel like I have no say in things, yet she tries to manage all the details of my life. I guess you can read the frustration in my writing. I harbor bitterness toward her. We are not dealing with the issues, and I'm tired of listening to the same whining over and over. I want to have a better marriage, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. I am deeply concerned. That is why I came to this seminar even though she would not come with me." Sonia expressed a similar sense of hopelessness. She is in her 3rd marriage and has been married for 3.5 years. At present, our marriage is in the fall season. It is producing high anxiety. The presence of anger is stagnating our relationship. Conflicts over the children bring great sadness. At times it is overwhelming and causes a spirit of defeat. Constant struggles are creating a future of uncertainty for us and the children. All these rampant emotions bring fear. I am very concerned about our relationship. I have asked my husband to go for counseling, but he refuses. I don't know what else to do. Strategy 7 is for people like Sonia and Todd, who are willing to work on their marriages but find little encouragement from their spouses. Although these husbands and wives sincerely hope that things will get better, many of them believe they have already done all they can to deal with the issues that have kept them from marital unity. Most are discouraged with the results. If they have gone for counseling, it has not been productive. If they have read books, they have read them alone, wishing their spouse would hear what the author is saying and be moved to change. Some have tried the method of gentle confrontation but have been met with a silent audience and no response. Some, in desperation, have tried yelling and screaming. Their pain has been so intense that they have actually lost control trying to express it. Their loud cries for help have brought a counterattack or withdrawal. Consequently, some husbands and wives have resigned themselves to the idea that their spouse will never change, and they are left with only two options: tolerate a life of misery or get out of the marriage and hope for something better. Once they choose between these two sorry alternatives, they become prisoners of their decision. Thousands of people live in these self-made prisons because they fail to understand the power of positive influence. It is true that you cannot change your spouse, but it is equally true that you can and do influence your spouse every day. Because we are individuals and because we have free will, no one can force us to change our thoughts or behavior. On the other hand, because we are also relational creatures, we are influenced by everyone with whom we interact. We're influenced by what we hear and see. Advertisers make millions of dollars each year because of this reality. They do not make us buy their products, but they do influence us. Otherwise, they would stop advertising. The power of influence has profound implications for the seasons of marriage. However, we must first acknowledge that we cannot directly change our spouse's personality or behavior. We cannot control how they think or feel or the words that come out of their mouths. We can make requests, but we cannot be assured that they will respond positively to our requests. If we mistakenly believe that we can directly change our spouse's behavior, we will likely spend our time trying to manipulate them. The idea behind manipulation is that if I do this, my spouse will be forced to do that. If I can make him happy enough, he will respond to my request, or, if I can make her miserable enough, she will respond to my request. However, every effort at manipulation will ultimately fail for one simple reason: our spouses have the freedom to choose their response. The moment they realize that we are trying to control them by manipulation, they rebel. No one wants to be manipulated or controlled. Even though you cannot directly control your spouse's attitudes and actions, you do have the ability to influence him or her either positively or negatively, by word or by deed. Every time you encounter your spouse, you exert a subtle influence. If your spouse walks into the room, gives you a hug and a kiss, and says, "I love you, I've missed you today," he or she has influenced you in a positive way. However, if your spouse walks into the house, fails to acknowledge your presence, and goes straight to the computer room or the refrigerator, or if your spouse walks in and immediately criticizes your appearance or behavior, he or she has influenced you in a negative way. Everything you do or say, or don't do or say, influences your spouse for better or for worse. Your words and behavior can either cause your spouse tremendous pain, hurt, and discouragement like the icy winds of winter, or be a soothing balm that powerfully influences your spouse in the direction of positive change like the warm breezes of summer. Over the years I have tested this strategy with numerous individuals in troubled marriages. When a husband or wife is willing to choose a positive attitude that leads to positive actions, the change in the spouse is often radical. One woman said, "I can't believe what has happened to my husband. I never dreamed he could be as loving and kind as he has been for the last 3 months. This is more change than I ever anticipated." The power of positive influence holds tremendous potential for troubled marriages. When all is said and done, you will have had a positive or a negative impact on your spouse. Which will it be? The choice is yours. Choosing to have a positive impact. If I got out of bed only on the mornings when I really felt like getting out of bed, I would be covered with bed sores. I go against my feelings almost every morning and choose to get up because I desire to do something positive with my life. Normally, before the day is over, I feel good about having gotten up. My positive choices lead to positive actions that result in positive feelings. I feel good about myself because I have invested my day wisely. Positive choices lead to positive actions that result in positive feelings. The same principle applies to marriage. When I choose to have a positive influence on my wife, regardless of how I might feel, my positive choices lead to positive actions that result in positive feelings for both me and my wife. Choosing to implement the power of positive influence is good for your own mental health, in addition to the positive impact it will have on your spouse. Where do we begin? Perhaps you can identify with the woman who said to me, "Our marriage has been so dysfunctional for so long, I don't know where to start." The first step in any positive change is to recognize and acknowledge that you have a choice. You don't have to be controlled by your emotions or your spouse's emotions. You don't have to respond in the same old way to the same old provocations. You can choose a different response. Even if the biggest obstacle in your marriage is your own past behavior and attitudes, you don't have to stay stuck there. Just because you've made your bed, doesn't mean you have to lie in it. You can choose to get up and make a positive investment in your marriage. You may feel hurt, disappointed, frustrated, or even angry in your marriage, but these emotions need not control your behavior. Emotions are to be acknowledged and processed, but they are not to be the controlling factor in our lives. If we allow angry feelings to control our behavior, we may lash out with critical, condemning words or physical abuse. On the other hand, we may say to ourselves, I feel angry. I feel hurt, disappointed, and frustrated. But I want to have a positive influence on my spouse, and I refuse to be controlled by these emotions. Positive change begins with positive choices. Once you have decided to implement the power of positive influence in your marriage, you are ready to begin utilizing the 6 other strategies discussed in this book. After 30 years of counseling married couples, I know of no better approach. Let's assume for a moment the worst-case scenario. Your spouse is unwilling to read this book, is unwilling to go for counseling, is unwilling to even talk about your marriage, and appears to be totally closed to the idea of improving your marriage. Perhaps he or she is even critical of your efforts. If this is true, you may be feeling all the emotions of winter and fall. I am not encouraging you to deny these feelings. Rather, I am encouraging you to admit your feelings but not be controlled by them. The decision to implement the power of positive influence may be the most significant decision you have ever made in your marriage. Therefore, I am inviting you to join me in walking through the first 6 strategies again, looking at them from the perspective of someone in your situation. At the moment, your spouse may not be willing to join you in the journey, but I want you to acknowledge that he or she cannot keep you from making the journey. As we travel, I will introduce you to individuals who have tried these strategies and reaped the benefits. Strategy 1. Deal with past failures. Anna had been married 8 years when her marriage quickly turned to winter. I guess we had been in the fall season for some time, she said. It's just that I didn't recognize it. One day I overheard my husband say to someone on the phone, "I'll miss you, too." I knew this was not a business conversation. In my heart, I knew he was talking to another woman. I didn't want to believe it, so I didn't say anything about it. But when the phone bill came, I checked the numbers and found numerous calls to a number I didn't recognize. Then one night, the phone rang. I answered it and a lady asked to speak with Rob. I told her that he was not home at the moment and asked if she would like for him to call her back. She said yes and gave me her number. Immediately, I matched the number and knew that this was the lady Rob had been calling. When I confronted him, he admitted that the call was from a woman at work but assured me that there was no sexual relationship, it was "just a friendship." But I knew there was more to it. I was so hurt and angry. I couldn't believe that he had betrayed me. I withdrew in silence. I didn't talk to Rob for 2 weeks. Then I told him I wanted out of the marriage, that I couldn't live with a man I couldn't trust. He said, "You are making more of this than it is. I have not been unfaithful to you. I told you it was just a friendship." I said, "You don't call someone 16 times in 2 weeks and call it a friendship. And I don't know how many times you called her on your cell phone." I was furious. The next day I saw a counselor. I didn't want to leave Rob without talking with someone. I knew that I was so angry I was likely to do something I would later realize was foolish. I went to the counselor twice a week for the next 3 weeks. In the early sessions, she listened to my rage and helped me take a realistic look at my marriage. She pointed out that this situation did not happen overnight. I began to realize that part of this was my fault. I had been so involved with our 2 preschool children that I had basically ignored Rob's needs. I had been very critical of him for not helping me the way I thought he should. I asked myself the question, "If I were a man, would I want to come home to a woman like me?" My answer devastated me. I knew I had failed Rob. Now, that did not excuse his behavior, but I knew I had to deal with my own failure first. At first I resisted the idea. I said, "But why should I confess my failures when he is the one involved with someone else?" The counselor did not excuse Rob's behavior, but she affirmed that if I wanted to find healing for my marriage, I needed to deal with my own failure. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I asked God to show me where I had failed Rob over the past 8 years. God answered that prayer. I wrote everything down as it came to mind, and I wept. I asked God to forgive me and I prayed for the courage to admit my failures to Rob. Later, my counselor helped me write out a confession statement, which included a list of the things God had brought to my mind. One night I said to Rob, "I know that I have been angry with you for the past few weeks. I've been cold and harsh. I guess that's because I have been hurt so deeply. But as you know, I've been going for counseling, and I have realized that you are not the only one who has sinned in our relationship. The other night, I asked God to show me where I have failed you. And if you are willing to listen, I would like to share what He told me. I have asked Him to forgive me, and I would like to ask you to forgive me as well." When I read my list of failures, Rob responded, "You're beating up on yourself, Anna. You're trying to take responsibility for my failures. There's no excuse for what I've done." I said, "Rob, I appreciate your saying that. But the fact is, all these things are still true. I have not been the wife you've deserved. With God's help and your willingness, it is going to be different in the future." We continued to talk and eventually Rob said, "I'm willing to forgive you if you will forgive me. I want to join you in counseling, because I know we can make our marriage better." That was the night things changed for us. We've been in counseling now for 6 months. We've made great progress. Our lives are very different. We're learning how to meet each other's needs, and I am so encouraged. I would even say that we are getting near the springtime. And I expect to see the crocuses soon. It's like you said, I could not change Rob, but I could have a positive influence on him by dealing with my own failures. I'm so grateful for the guidance of my counselor, who helped me process my emotions and steered me in the right direction. I do not wish to imply that in every situation the spouse will reciprocate to the power of positive influence as quickly as Rob did. But I do believe that dealing honestly with your own past failures is the first step in having a positive influence on your spouse. You may take the step of confession and repentance for your failures and your spouse may respond to you harshly. One husband said, "I tried what you suggested and my wife said, if you think that a lousy confession is going to change my mind, you are wrong. You have hurt me too deeply. Saying, 'I'm sorry,' is not enough. You cannot control your spouse's response, but by confessing your own failures, you will have a positive influence on your spouse whether or not it is evident. The best choice you can make is to deal with your own past failures and leave the results to God. No matter how your spouse responds to your confession, you will have a positive influence because you have followed the instructions of Jesus to, first take the plank out of your own eye." Strategy 2. Choose a winning attitude. If it is the middle of winter in your marriage, a positive attitude can make all the difference. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish doctor imprisoned by the Nazis during World War II, discovered the power of a positive attitude in the midst of a concentration camp. We who lived in the concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of his freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The men who chose to give away their last pieces of bread were not motivated by their emotions but by their attitudes. Their positive actions affected the emotions and attitudes of their fellow prisoners. There are some who would object to the idea of having a positive attitude when one is feeling hurt, anger, disappointment, and frustration. They object on the grounds that to think positive when one feels negative is hypocritical. But I believe that is a false premise, and to the degree that it has permeated Western thinking, it has been detrimental to marital relationships. In other areas of life, we often go against our emotions. We may feel discouraged or depressed when a friend calls to invite us to lunch, but we choose to go, put on a smile, and think positive. By the time the lunch is over, our feelings of discouragement may well have lifted, if only momentarily. Our attitudes and actions affect our emotions. Following the steps suggested in this strategy, you can choose a winning attitude. Acknowledge that your negative thinking is making things worse rather than better. Identify your spouse's positive characteristics and choose to thank God for these traits. Thank God that your spouse is made in His image and is therefore extremely valuable. Thank God that your spouse is uniquely gifted and has a unique role to play in the kingdom of God. Thank God that marriage was His idea and ask Him to give you the ability to be His messenger by communicating positive statements to your spouse. Then begin to express appreciation for the positive traits you observe in your spouse. You can choose a winning attitude even when your spouse shows no interest in improving your marriage. I first met Stuart in Rome, Georgia. He had been married for 15 years, and he admitted that he and his wife, Karen, had spent most of those years in the winter season of marriage. For years, I blamed Karen for our poor marriage. She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I agreed to that and worked hard to support the family. The problem, as I saw it, was that she was not doing her part. The house always looked a wreck, and I was lucky if she cooked one meal a week. She was never interested in sex, and frankly, I got to the place where I was not that interested either. We were raising the kids, but our marriage was empty. One day, I was reading my Bible in desperation. I stumbled across Philippians 4:8, "Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." It was like God said to me, "You have had a negative attitude about your marriage, and it is not helping. Why don't you begin to focus on the positive? Look for the good things in your wife and begin to give her compliments." I asked God to help me make a list of positive things about Karen. I was amazed at how long the list was. Then I asked Him to give me the ability to give her one compliment each day and refrain from making negative statements to her. What happened in the next month was unbelievable. When I stopped criticizing her and began expressing appreciation for the positive things I observed in her, my wife's behavior began to change. She began to smile again and to become flirty like she was when we dated. I'll never forget the first time she initiated sex. I was totally blown away. A couple of months later, we had a marriage seminar at our church, and I asked her if she would like to attend. She agreed, and that was another big step forward. We definitely moved from winter to springtime. It was like a whole new relationship. We began talking about our marriage and working through the things that had been painful to both of us in the past. We have made tremendous progress, and I am excited about our future together. I wish everyone could have the kind of marriage we have. Stuart and Karen's journey from winter to spring began with Stuart's choice to have a winning attitude and his commitment to learn to focus on the positive things about Karen. Often, marital seasons begin to change when one person chooses a winning attitude in spite of negative feelings. Strategy 3. Learn to speak your spouse's love language. Ruth showed up at my office without an appointment. I happened to be free and agreed to see her. She wasted no time in getting to the point. "I have an appointment with an attorney at 2 o'clock, she said. "I'm going to divorce my husband. 20 years of misery is long enough. I don't know why I came by your office. I don't think there is anything you can do, but I guess I thought I should at least talk to a counselor before I see the attorney." I listened for the next hour as Ruth poured out her story of pain. It was basically a story of neglect. Her husband was an auto mechanic, who had his garage in the backyard of their home. He was a hard-working man but apparently knew little about relating to his wife. From her perspective, he expects me to have his meals prepared, wash and iron his clothes, and have sex when he desires. Other than that, he has no time for me. And if I happen to be late in preparing one of the meals, he curses me out. He spends his evenings working in the shop, except on Wednesday nights when he goes out with the boys to drink. Usually, he doesn't get drunk, and when he does, he is not abusive. He mainly sleeps on the couch that night. "I just feel that I cannot continue in this relationship," she said. I was deeply sympathetic with Ruth, but I took the opportunity to explain to her the power of unconditional love. I shared with her the concept of the 5 love languages, and I told her about the love tank. When I suggested that her husband's love tank had probably been empty all his life, except for the brief time when he and Ruth were in love, she responded, "It's interesting that you would say that. When we were dating, he was kind to me. I really thought I was marrying a good man, but after the wedding everything changed." I suggested that when her husband came down off the emotional high of their dating relationship, he reverted to his normal emotional state, which was one of an empty love tank. I challenged Ruth to a 6-month-long experiment. I asked her to speak her husband's primary love language once a week to see what might happen. She was not overly enthusiastic about the project, but she agreed. She called the attorney and put the divorce on hold. What happened over the next 3 months was, in her words, unbelievable. If anyone had told me that my husband would start speaking my love language and that I would have love feelings for him again, I would have said it was impossible. The fact is, I do have love feelings for him, and he is speaking my love language. I wish I had known the power of love 20 years ago. I can't believe I waited so long to get help. Not all spouses will respond to expressions of love as quickly as Ruth's husband did, but most husbands and wives are desperately in need of emotional love. When they receive it unconditionally, they begin to experience positive feelings toward their spouses. Eventually, many will reciprocate those expressions of love, moving the marriage out of fall or winter and into the seasons of spring and summer. Your decision to love in spite of your hurt may be the most significant decision you ever make. Strategy 4. Develop the awesome power of empathetic listening. I was leading a series of marriage enrichment classes at a local church when I met Mark. One of our sessions focused on empathetic listening. Mark stayed after class and told me the frustration he was experiencing in his marriage. My wife, Carol, is hypercritical of everything I do. I feel no support from her. I try to work hard, but it is very discouraging when she puts down everything I do. She criticizes the way I relate to the children. She is critical of my relationship with my mother. Actually, I see my mom very little now because I don't want to hear Carol's angry words about her. She says I don't listen to her, and maybe I don't. But how can I listen when everything I hear is critical? I agreed to spend some individual time with Mark to see if we could come up with a strategy that might stimulate growth in his marriage. He assured me that his wife would not come for counseling. He had suggested it before, but she was not open to it. Over the next several weeks, I shared with Mark that most hypercritical people speak out of hurt, anger, and an empty love tank. I tried to help him understand that the road to healing often begins with an empathetic listener. I assured him that I knew it would not be easy, but if he wanted to have a positive influence on his wife, empathetic listening was probably the best way to start. I explained that the goal was to see the world through the eyes of his spouse and thus understand what she was experiencing. We talked about how to listen without judging and how to affirm his wife even when he disagreed with her ideas. It took a while, but I knew that Mark was beginning to get the idea of the power of empathetic listening. We worked on some of the listening skills discussed in Strategy 4, and Mark began the hard work of really listening to his wife. What happened over the next few months was more than either of us had anticipated. When Mark re-engaged in his marriage, using empathetic listening as his main strategy, his wife's critical attitude began to soften. It was probably 2 months before he noticed any difference, and even then it was only that she was calmer in her expressions of displeasure. But I guess she realized that I was listening to her, Mark said, so she didn't need to scream at me. I think the biggest thing that happened was that I began to understand her better. I had no idea that she carried so much hurt inside. I realized that I had not caused all her pain, but I had added to it by not understanding what was going on inside her. Within 6 months, Carol was willing to start individual counseling to deal with some of her past hurts. Later, she and Mark spent 6 months in marital counseling together. Today, they have a healthy marriage. In fact, they led marriage enrichment classes at their church. Never underestimate the power of empathetic listening. Strategy 5. Discover the joy of helping your spouse succeed. Barbara was in my office complaining about her husband, Richard. He wants to be a real estate salesman. For the past 6 months, he's spent every spare minute studying for the real estate exam. I don't think he has the personality to be a salesman. He says I'm not supportive of him, but I'm just trying to help him be realistic. Has he tried selling real estate before? I asked. No, she said, but he tried selling cars, and that didn't go very well. He thinks he's found his niche, but he has been working for a real estate company for 6 weeks now and hasn't sold a house. We can't pay the bills on my salary, and who knows when he is going to get a check. I could tell that Barbara was extremely frustrated. All her conversations with Richard had not seemed to quell his desire to sell real estate. It took 3 or 4 counseling sessions before Barbara was able to accept the idea that because Richard had spent so much time in preparation to pass the realtor's exam and because he had persisted in spite of her efforts to dissuade him, maybe he could succeed in the real estate business. In time, Barbara came to understand that his success or failure might depend on her emotional support. How far in debt would you be if Richard did not bring home a check for 1 year? I asked. The next week, Barbara came back with a figure. I suggested that she and Richard borrow that amount of money and draw on it as needed, while together seeking to make him a successful real estate salesman. If he succeeds, I reasoned, the loan can be easily repaid. If he fails, it is not an exorbitant amount for the two of you to pay while he works at another job. At least you will know whether real estate is Richard's niche. With this emotional security, Barbara bought the idea of helping Richard become a success. She was going against her fears, but she knew that he deserved to have her support in a project to which he had devoted so much time and energy. I warned her against trying to take over his business and telling him how to be successful. Rather, her role was to be supportive by expressing interest in his daily experiences and rejoicing in any small victory that came. If he became disappointed from losing a sale, her response would be, "I'm sure I would feel disappointed if I were in your shoes as well. But that's part of sales. We'll just look for the next one and believe the best. You want to be a success at this, and I know you can do it." At the end of the year, the loan had been repaid and Richard and Barbara had a small savings account. The second year was even better. Over the past 10 years, there have certainly been ups and downs, but Richard has become one of his company's best salesmen. He and Barbara can laugh now about their one-year experiment. But Richard knows that without her support, he probably would not have made it. Barbara takes great joy in knowing that she helped her husband succeed at something he really wanted to do. As a byproduct of his business, Richard learned some principles at various sales seminars that would also enhance his marriage. He learned how to communicate with Barbara in a positive way and how to encourage her with affirming words. Together, they have been smelling the roses of summer for several years. Of course, Richard might also have failed in the real estate business. But with Barbara's support, he probably would have recognized it sooner and turned from it with dignity rather than defeat. Helping your spouse succeed may involve walking together through some failures, but at least you will be walking together. Remember, keeping your marriage in the spring and summer seasons does not necessarily mean there won't be some poison ivy and yellow jackets along the way, but a unified marriage will be better able to weather the adversity and stay strong. What desires has your spouse expressed? In what ways might you be supportive of these desires? Helping your spouse succeed is a positive strategy for improving your marriage. Strategy 6. Maximize your differences. Brad was a morning person. Before marriage, he had dreams of having breakfast with his wife, discussing the prospects of the day, and praying together before work. After marriage, he discovered that Jenny didn't do mornings. While he jumped out of bed like a jack in the box, she eased into the morning like a bear waking up from hibernation. For the first several years of their marriage, Brad resented Jenny. He usually held his frustration inside, but occasionally he would accuse her of being lazy. He would tell her that she should go to bed earlier or that all she needed was a good cup of coffee. There were other differences that also frustrated Brad. He liked to hike, but Jenny was not a hiker. When they dated, she had accompanied him on a couple of treks, but she couldn't figure why anyone would want to walk through the woods and run the risk of picking up ticks or being bitten by a snake. She'd been raised in the city and thought that the woods were for animals, not humans. She liked to go to symphonies. Brad preferred rock concerts. Within a few years, Brad was convinced he had made a serious mistake in marrying Jenny. The differences were too great. "I didn't see any way that we would ever get it together," he said. Then one day, I read a book on marriage. I guess I was pretty desperate, and I thought maybe I would find something that could help me. In a chapter titled Differences, The Grounds for Compatibility, the author talked about the fact that all couples have differences. Some learn to work together as a team and others simply spend a lifetime arguing. He knew that Jenny would not read the book, but he knew that he had a strategy for improving their marriage. So I made a list of all the things that irritated me about Jenny and began to ask myself, what are the positive aspects of our differences? It was amazing what I began to see. I realized that Jenny's propensity to sleep in provided me a wonderful setting for my personal quiet time with God. I could have an uninterrupted time with God before I began my day. I realized what a blessing that was. So I thanked God for making us different. When Jenny tried to hike with me, I was always on her case because she never kept up. This irritated me and made the hike less enjoyable for her. For me, hiking was a way of unwinding from the pressures of life, relaxing in the beauty of nature and realizing that life was not a rat race. I enjoyed hiking alone much more than the frustration of hiking with Jenny. So I thanked God for giving me a wife who encouraged me to hike alone. I learned that in all our differences, there was a positive side that I had failed to see. After I started thanking God for the differences, I found myself appreciating Jenny more, and eventually I got around to telling her how much I appreciated her. My former words of condemnation became words of commendation. In time, it didn't happen overnight. Jenny's attitude toward me changed. When I allowed her to be the person God had made her to be and recognized the positive things about her personality, she began to affirm me and the emotional warmth came back into our marriage. I hate to think what would have happened to us if I had not discovered the truth that differences are the grounds for a compatible marriage. Your spouse may be unwilling to read this book with you or to work with you on a strategy for maximizing your differences. But you can begin the process by recognizing your spouse's positive traits, thanking God for them, and expressing your appreciation. When you take the initiative and seek to maximize your differences, you are implementing the power of positive influence. This power may well lead your marriage out of the dead of winter and into a more enjoyable season. As one woman said to me, after all that had happened in our marriage, if someone had told me that I would have loving feelings for my husband again, I would have said, no way. But I do. He has asked me for forgiveness and is really trying to work on our marriage. I never thought that day would come. It makes all my efforts worthwhile. Given time, I think we will see spring and summer again. Through perseverance, prayer, and positive action, she was reaping the fruit of implementing the power of positive influence. Now that you've had an initial exposure to the 4 seasons of marriage and 7 strategies for enhancing the seasons of your marriage, I want to challenge you and encourage you to develop a plan for applying these principles to your marriage. I wrote this book to give you a simple paradigm for understanding the quality of your marriage and to give you some practical steps that will enable you to develop the kind of marriage that God designed for you. God did not create marriage to make us miserable. According to His design, a husband will love his wife as Christ loved the church. He will give his life away in ministry and service to his wife. In this climate of love, according to God's design, a wife will be free to reciprocate her husband's love and to find ways to invest her life in service to him. When a husband and wife both live according to God's design for them, they will be mutually submitted to each other and looking out for each other's best interest. In this free and loving partnership, they will be able to accomplish the purpose that God has for their life together. God designed just such a marriage for you. The reason I feel so strongly about the message of this book is because I have seen these strategies turn literally thousands of marriages from the coldness of winter to the excitement of spring. I know they will work for you. But first you must put your plan into practice. Abstract knowledge is of little value, but applied knowledge is wisdom. I will be the first to admit that my marriage to Carolyn is still in process, yes, even after 42 years. The reality is that every marriage is still in process. No one has the perfect marriage. The good news is that you can have a better marriage than you do now. The strategies we have discussed will move your marriage in the right direction. Strategy 1 challenges you to deal with past failures. Failure alone will not destroy a marriage, but unconfessed and unforgiven failure will. Strategy 2 reminds you that attitude often makes the difference between winter, spring, summer, or fall. A negative, critical attitude pushes you toward the coldness of winter, whereas a positive attitude, which looks for the best in your spouse and affirms it, leads to the warmth of spring and summer. Strategy 3 encourages you to discover and speak your spouse's primary love language. Everyone has a deep emotional need to feel loved. When you meet that need for your spouse, you create a climate in which the crocuses can begin to bloom in your marriage. Strategy 4 gives you the tools to develop the art of empathetic listening. When your spouse is talking, the most powerful thing you can do is listen. Only as you listen empathetically will you come to understand your spouse's thoughts, feelings, and desires. Understanding leads to a blossoming of intimacy. Strategy 5 helps you discover the joy of helping your spouse succeed. Few accomplishments in life are more satisfying or have greater results than helping your spouse accomplish the purposes for which God designed him or her. Implement this strategy and share the rewards of true success. Strategy 6 teaches you how to maximize your differences. God made husbands and wives different for a purpose, a positive purpose. When you learn how to turn your differences into assets, you and your spouse will both be winners. Strategy 7 shows you how to implement the power of positive influence. Your spouse may not be willing to read this book or discuss strategies for improving your marriage, but that doesn't mean your efforts will be in vain. Although you cannot control your spouse's behavior, you can choose to exert a positive influence. Perhaps the most powerful way to influence your spouse is by applying the concepts you've learned in Strategies 1 to 6. Take the first step. Ask your spouse to read Part 1, which describes the 4 seasons. Then take the marital seasons profile, which will help you identify the season of your marriage. Discuss the results with each other and express your desire for growth and improvement. I hope that you and your spouse will read this book together, discuss the 7 strategies, and seek to implement them. If you do, I'm confident you will find that the seasons of your marriage will be greatly enriched and enhanced. Question. I really want a better marriage, but I don't have much hope. I have read Strategy 7 on the power of influence, but nothing I do seems to make any difference. When I've tried in the past, my spouse has been unwilling to make any changes. I don't know if it's worth the effort to try again. Answer. I am deeply sympathetic with your lack of hope. When your best efforts are met with resistance or apathy, it's easy to get discouraged. However, the fact that you have seen little or no change in the past does not mean that your spouse is incapable of making changes in the future. Your attitudes and behavior constantly influence your spouse for better or for worse. Although it may seem as if you are having little influence on your spouse's behavior, your influence is actually quite profound. The strategies I have shared in this book, when applied consistently, have helped thousands of couples effectively stimulate marital growth. Don't allow the apparent failure of past efforts to keep you from trying these strategies in your marriage. Some people are more successful at completing projects when they are more successful at completing projects when they are working with a group, or at least with one other person. For example, many people who have unsuccessfully tried to lose weight on their own have finally succeeded when they joined a weight loss program that involves a regular meeting with other people. If this has been your experience, then perhaps you could share this book with a friend who is in a marital season similar to yours. The two of you could meet regularly to discuss the 7 strategies and your efforts to implement them. The first step, the decision to try again, is often the hardest. But trying holds the potential for positive change. The farmer who never plants the seed will not reap a harvest. Question. What if I try a strategic action that I believe is positive but it rubs my spouse the wrong way or is perceived as manipulative? Answer. Perhaps the best approach is to be proactive. Before beginning a new strategy, ask your spouse if such behavior on your part will enhance his or her life. For example, let's say you want to initiate Strategy 1, deal with past failures. You might say to your spouse, I've been thinking about my life, and I know that I am not a perfect spouse. I realize that I have failed you in some rather significant ways. I would like to identify these failures and put them behind me. I really want to be the spouse you deserve. Would you be willing to help me identify my failures and perhaps make some suggestions on what I could do to make life easier for you? Your spouse might respond flippantly by saying such things as, sounds like you've been to church again, or, I thought you'd never ask. Then again, he or she might respond sincerely by saying, I'd be willing to do anything to make our marriage better. Your spouse's response is not the most important issue. What matters is your honest communication that you are giving serious consideration to your marriage, that you have chosen to deal with past failures, and that you are seeking to take steps of growth. Deal with past failures, and that you are seeking to take steps of growth. Informing your spouse of what you are doing may allay his or her fears and stimulate a positive response when you begin to implement the plan. On the other hand, if you seek to take a positive step in your marriage and your spouse responds by saying, I don't like that. I find it offensive. I feel as if you are trying to manipulate me, it's time to practice the skills of empathetic listening. You might ask, in what way do you see this as being manipulative? Listen carefully and ask other clarifying questions. You might say, are you saying that when I do, you feel as if I am trying to force you to do something you don't want to do? Often, honest dialogue can help you work through your spouse's initial resistance, lead you toward implementing positive changes, and make it easier for your spouse to respond positively. It is certainly possible that what one person perceives to be a loving action may be interpreted by the other as an effort to manipulate. That is why Strategy 3 is so important. Learning to speak your spouse's love language is one of the keys to moving a marriage toward spring and summer. Question. If trust has been compromised or destroyed, how do my spouse and I get started on the road to reconciliation? Answer. Most couples enter marriage with a high level of trust in each other. Without trust, they probably would not make the decision to marry. Trust flourishes until one, or both, of the spouses violates the trust either by lying or by some other act of unfaithfulness. Once trust has been damaged or destroyed, it is not automatically restored when the offending spouse admits, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?" Even genuine confession, repentance, and forgiveness do not instantly restore trust. I often describe trust as a fragile plant. Violating trust is like stepping on the plant and pushing it into the mud. Although it has the capacity to straighten up and grow healthy again, it will take time. When trust is violated a second time, and grow healthy again, it will take time. When trust is violated a second time, it's like breaking off the plant at ground level. The root system is still there, but the trunk of the plant is now gone. It will take even longer for the roots to produce trust again. The only road to restoration is for the offending individual to become trustworthy again. If you're the one who has broken trust, you must consistently do what you say you're going to do and go where you say you are going. In short, you must live a life above reproach. When this happens, trust slowly grows to become healthy again. If you want your spouse to trust you again, live your life above board. Let your life be an open book. Invite your spouse to check up on you. Welcome his or her inquiries. Live in such a way that you have nothing to hide. When this happens, you will find that in time your spouse will genuinely trust you again. Question. There's a saying, better the devil we know than the devil we don't know. How can couples overcome their fear of negative consequences, which may paralyze them and keep them from pursuing positive change? Answer. Let's face it, change can be scary. It may take us out of our comfort zone. However, change is inevitable. We cannot avoid it. Change also involves a certain amount of risk, but risk, too, is part of life. We take certain risks when we get into a car and drive onto the highway. Most of us are willing to take the risk because the alternative does not hold the potential that we desire. The same is true when we seek to initiate change in a marital relationship. There is always the risk that the process may provoke arguments. We may verbalize thoughts and feelings that have been dormant for months or perhaps years. We may hear things that cause us pain. On the other hand, if we don't initiate change, we will hamper our potential for positive movement. Therefore, most couples are willing to take the risk of seeking to stimulate marital growth because they know that the alternative locks them into something less than they desire. One of the purposes of this book is to teach you strategies for seeking marital growth that will help you initiate positive change. Following these strategies does not mean that you will experience no opposition to your efforts. It does mean that you are pursuing change in the most positive manner. The risks are minimal compared to the positive potential of moving your marriage to a more favorable season. OJUESTION. What if past hurts are so big, either within the marriage or from a spouse's family of origin, that a spouse is not able to address them even though motivated by a desire to improve the marriage? How can a couple begin to address a worst case marriage that is below freezing on the seasonal scale? Answer. It is true that some people are in bondage to the emotional chains of the past. They wish things were different, but they don't have the emotional energy to take constructive steps. They read a book like The 4 Seasons of Marriage and dream that things could be better, but they are immobilized. Their minds are confused, their emotions are distorted, and giving up seems easier than trying. These people will almost always need a professional counselor, pastor, or mature friend to help them untangle the crossed wires of the past and find a way out of their hopelessness. Often, a trusted friend will be the one who encourages this person to seek professional counseling or other help that is needed. In this case, the friend is the lifeline between the troubled individual and the source of hope. O_UESTION. Is it possible for a couple to live in 2 seasons at once, or does the worst season of the 2 define the marriage? Answer. As we have noted in a previous chapter, the latter stages of fall and the beginning stages of winter may be hard to distinguish. Likewise, the last stages of spring and the first stages of summer tend to blend together. It is my belief that most marriages fit into one of the 4 seasons of marriage rather clearly. However, there is nothing wrong with describing your marriage as a fall, winter, or a spring, summer marriage. It means that you have some of the characteristics of both seasons. The purpose of this book is to challenge couples to be always moving to a more favorable season of marriage or to continue living in such a season. We will not eliminate any of the 4 seasons from our marital experience. However, the ideal would be short falls and winters and long springs and summers. I believe that the strategies given in part 2 of this book will help couples accomplish this ideal. Question: is it necessary for both spouses to be in the same season in order for the marriage to be considered healthy and good? Answer: in my opinion, a husband and wife are always in the same season of marriage, whether they realize it or not. It is certainly true that in my research I discovered couples who had different perceptions of the season of their marriage. I remember one husband who said, "We have a summer marriage, I could not be happier." But his wife said, "We are definitely in the winter stage of marriage. I feel so isolated from my husband." Whether he knew it or not, this man's marriage was in the winter season. His needs and expectations were apparently being met, but his wife's needs and expectations were a totally different story. If one spouse perceives a marriage to be in spring and the other spouse perceives it to be in summer, their differences are of little consequence, but when a couple is as far out of touch with each other as the couple I've described above, the marriage is definitely experiencing winter. Marriage is definitely experiencing winter. Because husbands and wives have different expectations about what a marriage ought to be, they also may have different perceptions of the success of their marriage. Thus, it is not uncommon for a husband and wife to come to different conclusions about the season of their marriage. The reality of their marital relationship is probably somewhere between their 2 differing perspectives, but what is important is that they communicate with each other. By using the information in the 4 seasons of marriage, they will be able to establish a meaningful dialogue that will bring them to a deeper understanding of each other and enhance the season of their marriage. The marital seasons profile located at the end of part 1 can be extremely helpful in this communication process. Question: as couples move from one season to another, they will not always be in the same place or moving at the same pace. They won't always agree on what is happening in their marriage or what needs to happen. Is there more that can be said about how to work through these differences? Answer: this question focuses on an important reality. We are individuals, and marriage does not erase our individuality. We interpret situations differently. We have different emotional responses to the same experiences. We react differently to the events of life. For example, one spouse may process grief or disappointment by talking excessively, whereas his or her mate may withdraw in silent pain. Or one spouse works through adversity by activities while the other wants to gaze into the sunset and reflect. The object of marriage is not to make us clones of each other, rather it is for us to learn how to help our spouse develop his or her uniqueness so that together we can accomplish the purposes for which we were designed. When we see our spouse as a teammate rather than a competitor, we are far more likely to accomplish this objective. Rather than dividing over our differences, we come to delight in our differences, or what I call maximizing our differences. We come to delight in our differences, or what I call maximizing our differences. Question: if I try one of the strategies in the 4 seasons of marriage and it doesn't work, should I stop and try another? Answer: as I see it, the strategies I have shared in this book are not to be followed sequentially. Neither are they independent projects to be completed one by one. Instead, they are lifestyle attitudes and behavior patterns that we should seek to build into the structure of our lives. For example, choosing a winning attitude is something we hope to develop for a lifetime, not just as a quick fix to shore up a weak season in our marriage. Speaking our spouse's love language is a never-ending but greatly rewarding way of life. Becoming an empathetic listener will serve you well at home, in the neighborhood, and at the office. Helping your spouse succeed is a lifetime project and one that pays tremendous dividends. And learning to maximize your differences will make you and your spouse the winning team you desire to be. Dealing with past failures may be a major first step toward a revitalized marriage, but you and your mate will forever need to deal with daily or weekly failures. Admitting that you've failed and asking for forgiveness will become a way of life. Likewise, you will forever have a positive or a negative influence on your spouse. It is my prayer that the 4 seasons of marriage will help you have a positive influence on your spouse. In my opinion, the strategies always work because they change our attitudes and actions, thus creating positive emotions. They may or may not stimulate complementary changes in your spouse. However, when both you and your spouse seek to live by these 7 strategies, you will definitely spend more time in the spring and summer seasons of marriage. Question. So many of my friends are in the fall and winter seasons of marriage. What can I do to help them? Answer. The concern that you express is what has motivated many couples to become involved in the marriage enrichment movement over the past several years. Many others have devoted their vocational lives to marriage counseling. They deal with extremely troubled marriages, helping couples learn how to understand themselves and each other. Such counselors play an important role in preserving marriages. Not every couple needs professional counseling, but every couple does need marriage enrichment. Marriages either grow or they regress. They are either moving toward, or deeper into, spring and summer, or they are moving toward, or deeper into, fall and winter. Exposing ourselves to the help that is available through the marriage enrichment movement can make the difference between blooming crocuses and numbing ice storms. That is why, over the past several years, I have devoted so much of my energy to writing books such as The 4 Seasons of Marriage and leading marriage seminars. I believe that many couples are healthy enough in their marriages that they can read a book and implement the concepts, thus experiencing marital growth. Others are auditory learners, they understand things best when they hear them explained. Thus the conference and seminar setting is an ideal format for these people. For many years, I have encouraged couples to attend a marriage enrichment conference once a year and share a book on marriage once a year. If we can inspire widespread participation in these 2 approaches to marriage enrichment, I believe we will see thousands of marriages saved every year. I am encouraged that many communities and church organizations across the country are now offering small group, marriage enrichment activities. This trend country are now offering small group, marriage enrichment activities. This trend offers great hope for the future. Finding out what is going on in your community and getting involved will not only help your marriage but will also enable you to help others. If couples living in spring or summer marriages can reach out to those living in fall or winter and guide them to the appropriate marriage enrichment opportunity, we can make a tremendous difference in the quality of marriages in this country. I know of nothing that has the potential to change the overall cultural climate more than enriched and growing marriages. When you work at improving the quality of your marriage, you influence not only your friends but also your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren for generations to come. The greatest thing you can do for your friends is to give them a model of a healthy marriage, a marriage that makes the most of the 4 seasons. Take a walk through town or a mall and you're sure to spot an older couple strolling hand in hand, their facial expressions and body language giving clear evidence of a quality of love that has gone the distance. What a rewarding feeling they must enjoy knowing they've beaten the odds. Not only is their relationship still intact, but it's actually thriving. What does it take to have a marriage like that? What joys and struggles have they experienced along the way? We'd all like to know the secrets of their success. Whether it has been years since your wedding day or only days since you returned from your honeymoon, one thing is certain, you are in the most special relationship 2 people can have. Sometimes, marriage may be a complete joy, whereas other times your life together may seem like an incurable disease. If you've been married for a while, your feelings have probably run the gamut between those 2 extremes. All marriages experience the 4 seasons, including springtimes of vibrancy and excitement, fall seasons of discontentment and uncertainty, winters of anger and despair, and summertimes of growth and deepened love. Couples whose marriages survive and thrive have refused to give up, steadfastly sticking to the belief that their efforts to improve their marriages will eventually pay off. The following study questions provide you and your spouse an opportunity to do some preventive maintenance on your relationship. They will help you learn more about each other, change some weak habits, discover new qualities to appreciate, and enhance the areas of attraction that first brought you together. Because one of the more powerful ways to learn is by gleaning insights from others, the guide is designed for group discussions. However, it also includes personal questions that are ideal for spouses to work through together in private. You'll also find ideas for dates with your mate. Most are simple and can be adapted to fit your circumstances. Discussion starters are included as an extra help. Lastly, prayer topics will guide you as you commit your marriage to God in prayer. You are your spouse's most important prayer warrior. Praying together has the potential to bring huge blessings to your marriage. Whether your marriage is basking in the summer sun or buried under drifts of winter snow, there's always room for greater fulfillment. May you thrive in the present season of your marriage, enriched by the history you share and overflowing with hope for the years to come. The tour seasons of marriage. The nature of marriage. Each person is also endowed by God with certain latent possibilities. The partnership of marriage is an ideal environment for nurturing and developing these gifts and abilities. 1. Imagine a culture without marriage as a fundamental institution. Considering all aspects of culture: social, spiritual, financial, sexual, emotional, and generational, what benefits does monogamous marriage bring to society? 2. Many people, it seems, approach marriage as if it is a contract that can be broken if one party fails to uphold his or her end of the bargain, or if the situation simply doesn't feel right anymore. The Bible, on the other hand, speaks of marriage as a covenant. Malachi 2:14. Discuss the differences between a contract and a covenant and the impact of those differences on a marriage. You may want to refer to a Bible dictionary or my book Covenant Marriage, Building Communication and Intimacy. 3. In the United States, divorce rates hover somewhere around 50%. What do you see as common causes for this unfortunate phenomenon? Consider cultural trends, various stresses from outside the marriage: jobs, relatives, schedules, media, and internal factors, character qualities, attitudes. What are some practical ways in which a couple can set up a hedge of protection around their relationship against divorce? 4. What does it mean to say that marriage is a purposeful relationship? 5. What does intimacy involve? How is it developed and maintained? What can threaten it? 6. Emotions must lead to reason, and reason must be guided by truth if we are to take constructive action. Discuss the necessity of balancing emotions and reason. If you're willing, share with the group about a time in your marriage when your emotions got the best of you and dislodged reason. What was the effect on your spouse? For couples in private. Successful marriages are committed, united, intimate, purposeful, and complementary. On your own, list the personality traits that you and your spouse possess that complement each other. Then discuss your lists with each other. How do these traits strengthen, challenge, and benefit your relationship? Make it a date. If you and your spouse do not already have an established weekly date, it's time to start a new habit. Choose a mealtime that most easily fits your schedule and go to a favorite restaurant. Leave your cell phones, pagers, and other distractions at home, and focus on building your relationship. Conversation starters. Tell your spouse at least one quality you appreciate in him or her. Tell your spouse about an accomplishment that he or she has helped you achieve. Share prayer requests and commit to pray for each other this week. Commit it to prayer. Be honest with each other about the season your marriage is in. Ask God to meet you in that season and to help you believe that He can restore, refresh, enhance, and invigorate your relationship. Challenge yourselves to pray together and invigorate your relationship. Challenge yourselves to pray together regularly. Winter. Just as most people wouldn't lie down in the snow and wait to die, there's no reason to passively accept the coldness of a wintry marriage. There is a way out, and it begins with hope. 1. Discuss the characteristics and emotions of a winter marriage. Make a list of words and phrases that typify this season. 2. What brings most couples to the winter season of marriage? Hint: it's a onward answer. Discuss how this factor can affect a marriage and how to avoid falling into this trap. 3. Most couples have experienced a winter season in their marriages or know couples who have. Keeping identities confidential, discuss relationship factors you have observed that contribute to a winter marriage. 4. How do attitudes foster emotions? How can choosing a positive attitude help a couple avoid or get out of the winter season? 5. What actions usually characterize a winter marriage? 6. Imagine that a friend has shared with you about the serious problems in his or her winter marriage. What can you say that would be helpful? What should you not say? 7. Read Matthew 13:15-16 aloud. What do these verses say about a hardened heart? What do these verses suggest about rigidity in a marriage? Consider the negative, snowballing effect of resentment in a relationship. Why is it necessary to deal first with a hardened heart before it's possible to heal a marriage? 8. Read Jeremiah 33:10-12 aloud. How might these verses offer hope to a troubled marriage? 9. When two people choose to love again, the melting ice of winter will water the seeds of spring, and winter has served its ultimate purpose. Discuss the positive side of the winter season of marriage. What are some things you can do to move your marriage toward spring or to keep it from moving deeper into winter? Hope for the winter season of marriage. My lover spoke and said to me, "Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth, the season of singing has come, the cooing of doves is heard in our land." Song of Songs 2:10-12. On that day living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the eastern sea and half to the western sea, in summer and in winter. Zechariah 14:8. Heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed. Save me and I will be saved, for you are the one I praise. Jeremiah 17:14. I will heal their waywardness and love them freely, for my anger has turned away from them. Hosea 14:4. Jesus said to him, I will go and heal him. Matthew 8:7. My soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, and deliver me, save me because of your unfailing love. Psalm 6:3-4. I have taken an oath and confirmed it, that I will follow your righteous laws. I have suffered much, preserve my life, O Lord, according to your word. Accept, O Lord, the willing praise of my mouth, and teach me your laws.